welcome everyone to our second event, but we are going to start recording this. Welcome to Cultivator community. Today we're going to have a group discussion on collective intelligence in real life, hosted by Kris, and she's going to go share a little intro and walk us through this discussion. We're really excited to have you join us and looking forward to hearing all of your ideas and experiences. So Kris, right to you.
Thanks very much, Melissa. All right, here's our agenda for the next 30 minutes. I am going to do a quick introduction to collective intelligence. We're going to talk about a little case study for a group called Cultivate. And then we'll engage in some discussion around how might we promote our team's collective intelligence. And it's, we're all parts of lots of different teams, and so we can kind of take that discussion wherever it makes the most sense for all of you. But like Melissa said, I'm Kris Benefield. I'm the Learning Design and Development Lead for Cultivate. I'm a former teacher, current learning design professional, and I am very excited to facilitate this little discussion with all of you. So here we go. First, let's talk about intelligence. So we're all aware of individual intelligence. It comes in lots of different forms, and it's something science has been measuring in a variety of ways for a really long time, right? You can see on screen, right, these are just a couple of examples of the types of individual intelligence that we all might have. There's obviously lots of different kinds of intelligence, right? But collective intelligence is a different concept. And so that concept of sort of a group intelligence is more recent. And it really has some exciting kind of implications for how we work together, especially as our goals become more and more complex and the ways that we work become more and more complex as well. So collective intelligence is it's a way of describing the kind of intelligence that a group has. So it turns out that groups of people have their own form of intelligence, and it can be observed and measured in many of the same ways that individual intelligence can. So the thing that's surprising about this, besides that groups can have their own kind of intelligence, is that we might expect that a group's intelligence would be directly correlated with the individual intelligence of the different group members. But it turns out that's not actually the case. So just jamming a bunch of brilliant individuals together in a group isn't actually enough to create a brilliant, high-performing team. So there are some things that we can do, though, right? And what the research tells us, and this research comes specifically from MIT professor Thomas Malone in the book Superminds. So you can see the little annotation down there, but we can also share resources with you after the session. So in that research, 3 factors really emerged as the best predictors of collective intelligence and group performance. And none of them were related to individual intelligence. Okay, I'm just seeing some comments about sound. Are you guys doing okay? Yeah? Okay. So, not related to individual intelligence, right? The first factor is diversity. So a group's diversity is going to be a major predictor of their collective intelligence. So groups with a diverse makeup of cognitive styles, backgrounds, and genders just outperform groups that are less diverse. The second one is social perceptiveness. So groups that are more socially perceptive, which is like aware of and responsive to each other's emotions and needs, have higher levels of collective intelligence. And then the third factor is equal participation. So the researchers found that groups are significantly more effective when participation is equally distributed among group members versus when just 1 or 2 individuals carry most of the conversation. And I'm sure that we've all been in groups where that's the case. Some of us might even be the ones who are often carrying the conversation. But it turns out no matter how brilliant those folks might be who are really over contributing in the group, that equal participation is a significant factor for the group's overall collective intelligence. So there's some qualities. The research also shows us some behaviors, right? So some of the most important behaviors that are present in collectively intelligent teams include contributing to psychological safety, developing a shared understanding of the problem at hand, and embracing relevant technologies. You're going to see these come up again. I'm going to kind of review them, but first I'd really like to share a case study that illustrates some of these principles. All right, so Fold It. Fold It is an online game that's part of an experimental research project developed by the University of Washington Center for Game Science in collaboration with their Department of Biochemistry. So the objective of this game is to fold the structures of selected proteins as perfectly as possible using the tools provided in the game. So in 2011, the researchers used this game to crowdsource a solution to a scientific problem that had gone unsolved for 15 years, over 15 years, really. So the problem was about deciphering the kind of complex 3-dimensional structure of an enzyme that's related to the AIDS virus. You don't have to know all of this to kind of get the point of the story, right? But there's a complex problem in play here, and it was taking years and years and years to try to solve it. So they got thousands of people to play Fold It, from students to scientists to a 13-year-old boy in Virginia. Call that out just because it's part of the story and I think it's fun. So in less than 3 weeks, these people solved this problem that had been going on for 15 years. So in a fraction of the time, right, that the scientists have been trying to solve the problem using traditional methods, Folded players produced that 3D model of the enzyme that was accurate enough to facilitate molecular replacement, right, through a game, which is pretty impressive. And so just to kind of reinforce what some of those qualities and behaviors are to really maximize collective intelligence, if we think about the technology component, right, they use technology as a multiplier here by leveraging online gaming to really crowdsource that solution. So it gave them access to collaborators that they probably never would have been able to work with otherwise, right, from a much larger population of people than would normally be possible. And then by engaging so many people and not limiting themselves to only those ones that would traditionally collaborate on scientific problems, they ensured that they had access to a really inclusive and intellectually diverse group of people, right? So they weren't going to be in just their little echo chamber of scientists trying to solve this problem because it hadn't been working, right? So last but not least, they really made sure that they had a shared understanding of the problem. And I think this is cool because games do this, right? So by using the mechanism of a game, they're able to set up rules. They have constraints. You only have a certain number of tools and a certain number of things you can do, right? So instead of having to just explain really complex scientific concepts to people, they could put those kind of constraints and mechanisms in place to make sure that everybody was operating under the same parameters and working towards the same goal. All right, so there's your case study, little example of collective intelligence in action. And I'm just gonna kind of look at all of these qualities and behaviors again one more time and the definition, just to solidify them in our minds, and then we're gonna get into the discussion, okay? So collective intelligence is what happens when people collaborate with intention to get better, more impactful results. It's really about leveraging the power of lots of minds working together to discover the unknown, and it can make solutions that were previously impossible possible. And then all of those sort of enablers that you see underneath, right? The things that enable collective intelligence to exist and grow and to be leveraged effectively, right? You'll see a lot of these hopefully are looking familiar now, right? So using technology as a multiplier, ensuring shared understanding of the problem. Expansive discovery, which we haven't talked as much about, right? Expansive discovery is really about making sure that you can capitalize on the unique perspectives and experiences available in these diverse collaborations, right? By embracing and using that diversity to look for insights everywhere, even from unexpected places, right? So really kind of getting out there and thinking about the unusual out of the box kinds of ideas and solutions, right? Psychological safety, which we also touched on, right? Intellectual diversity and inclusion has come up a couple of times, and then open-mindedness and self-awareness. That piece I think is also really critical, and it's something that we can all do individually, right? Because you want to be able to not just bring a bunch of diverse people together and then not listen to them, right? You have to know what you're bringing to a collaboration. You have to think about what everybody else can bring to that collaboration and be open-minded and flexible enough to listen to those contributions. All right, so besides some of the kind of obvious things, right, about embracing these different enablers, this is really where we're going to get into the meat of the discussion. It's where we're going to spend the rest of our time, okay? So we would have 15 minutes. We really have about 10 right now because we started 5 after. But let's see how much we can do. So the prompt here is, how might we promote our team's collective intelligence? Teams, plural, can be lots of different teams. And so I'm just going to give you a couple of minutes, and myself too, to just think about all of these different items that are listed down the left-hand side. They should look very familiar, but they're just action-oriented versions of those enablers. And then I'm going to be filling in the ideas that you all share on the right-hand side. So after you think, you can put some things in chat if you want to, but you don't have to. Then we can start opening up our mics and sharing any ideas that we have about how to do this. So how might we assemble some diverse teams and groups to make sure that we're maximizing that enabler, right? How might we ensure equal participation in our meetings and in our projects? Make sense? Give me some nods. All right, awesome. Take a second to think, and then I'll invite you to open up your mics and share. All right, I'm ready whenever you are. You don't have to raise your hand. There aren't too many of us, so just feel free to turn on your mics and share any thoughts that you have for any of these items.
The first thing that came to mind for me for the how to leverage team members' unique skills and perspectives is getting curious and asking your team members what they do outside of work or what they're passionate about outside of work. And so you learn a lot about things that like skill sets that they have that they might not use every day at work or don't like fit under their job description. And then you can kind of lean into those skill sets the more you know about them.
Great. Anyone else? I mean, and you've sort of started us off in a good spot, Molly. So if anybody had a thought in that same area about leveraging team members' unique skills and perspectives, if you've seen anybody do this really well, if you have a thought about how you might do that with especially like a brand new team of diverse collaborators, any ideas are welcome.
Similar to that, I would say inviting teams to kind of share and teach other members of the team something that could or could not be related. I think that there's a lot of transferable skills that and or knowledge that people can apply cross industry, cross sectors, and different things like that. So I think that will help with like having everyone kind of go through rotation of sharing and teaching something, whether they feel like it's super relevant or not. That also would touch base on equal participation, a shared understanding, because then because the person's teaching it, everyone have like a more similar perspective, and then it also reflects how diverse the team would be.
Great. Excellent. I love that. If there are any others there, that's great. Or Melissa's just kind of opened the door to thinking about equal participation, for example, if somebody had a thought there about how to make something like that a little bit easier for a team.
I had something for the create a psychologically safe environment.
Great.
I feel like part of being able to grow as a team is like opening like the door to like other team members, so that like not every like discussion that happens on like a Zoom call is like particularly focused on like a work assignment, or like so like maybe like having like open office hours to just talk. I feel like maybe it's not something that needs so much emphasis, but like just having it, I think is like really good. So that we all kind of know like, yeah, like it's there.
Yeah, and so I'm also kind of hearing, so maybe something like open office hours, but I'm also hearing like talk about things that maybe aren't just the project at hand or that aren't just work related. Yeah? Great. To me, that is a way of kind of trying to build some trust, build some knowledge of each other, right? And that is a really important factor for psychological safety. So making sure that there are different kinds of opportunities to interact, that's kind of contained in there. And then also some of this more like personal, interpersonal communication, right, is a great way of at least getting to know each other at a base level so that you do feel a little bit more comfortable sharing. Any other thoughts on that one or any of the others that we've got listed here?
I wanted to talk about the grow self-awareness and open-mindedness as collaborators.
Great.
So I think it's very easy for teams to settle into specific norms and ways they collaborate. We always brainstorm this way. This is kind of the only way that ideas get surfaced in kind of this meeting or this place, whatever. And so I think like intentionally injecting new methods for collaboration and brainstorming into teams is good. And so like, hey, you know, we're going to be talking about X problem today. Can somebody on the team, you know, lead us through a different type of brainstorming method or a different type of collaborative method than we might normally use?
Great. So there's two kind of things there, right? It's bringing in those different methods and potentially inviting different team members to facilitate that conversation, right? Great. Any other reactions or thoughts on
So I
that
have two for equal participation. I think it's very easy for some people to take up more time, such as like myself, like people that are more open to talking and sharing ideas versus people that are more quiet. I think one way is to find a way to go through everyone in like maybe like have a specific order, whether that's alphabetical or around the table, so that everyone can participate. And another way to minimize one person kind of hogging up more airtime is maybe doing like, hey, for 30 seconds, here it is. And in that 30 seconds, you can share whatever idea. Another one that I heard regarding brainstorming that might help with self-awareness is, I forgot what they called it, but instead of brainstorming out loud, what everyone does is they'll take like a few minutes, write down all of their ideas first, and then go around sharing it, so that it avoids the trap of group thinking of like, oh yeah, I agree on that, and piggybacking. Instead, it allows us the safe space to think about these ideas first, and then pitching and or building up what other people didn't talk about, and or presenting like more out of the box thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a really great one. I'm glad you brought it up. That kind of divergent thinking in a brainstorming activity, or honestly in any type of discussion, can be super helpful for people who are more introverted, who might need a little bit more processing time. It's a really common kind of teaching technique too. And bonus, not only does it make it easier for people to participate equally, but it also is a great way of generating more divergent ideas, right? Because a lot of times when you have a group discussion and you immediately start sharing ideas out loud, then the first couple of ideas influence the ones that come after.
I'll just add one for technology as a multiplier quick, and then
Yeah.
I know Molly had some stuff too, which I'm happy to read out loud on your behalf if you'd like.
Great.
So the technology one, I've been working with a team recently that's been using a tool called Loom, but it essentially helps do exactly what we were just talking about. So you can tee up an idea or something for feedback, or kind of put something out to the team just like you would in a meeting, but then allow for asynchronous thoughts on it. So essentially, it's kind of you recording a quick voiceover video over something or talking about something or whatever, the way you would in a meeting, because like sometimes writing that down is hard and like, ugh, but like do that. Then you give people a day and they can kind of think about it in whatever way they want, as opposed to requiring people to think on the spot. So that's just an example. Sounds like Molly is using that as well, which is great. The other thing that I see Molly mentioned here, important for leaders and managers to be aware of who speaks up less, and actively reaching out to the people who are speaking out less and letting them know you value their contributions and giving them that chance to do it now. So I think there's a couple things there, right? One is that just like actively reaching out in the moment, and two is maybe actively working with that person one-on-one to think, hey, what might be the best way to get you involved in stuff? Because just putting them, like, yes, calling people out and putting them on the spot in the moment might work, but that also might be like the worst thing. And so like working with them in the right way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd say, that does seem like a great job for somebody who's leading or facilitating a meeting, right? But it's also something that can be established as a group norm when you're kind of coming in, right? Setting ground rules. If everybody understands that that's the expectation, you can kind of get other parts of the group on board with helping to kind of police that, right? And making sure that if somebody really is being very quiet or not getting a chance to contribute, that they're at least given the opportunity, right? It's great. There's a couple that we don't have any ideas for yet, so I'm wondering if we can take a second on each of those. So maybe we can start at the latter one, which is developing a shared understanding of the problem. And I do think that maybe one of the reasons something hasn't come up is because a lot of times we think that we have shared understanding just by sort of saying what the problem is, right? But if there are other things that you've seen or that you have thoughts about, in terms of how to make sure you're really on the same page, right? What might those be?
Yeah, I actually had this happen recently while organizing a panel. It was regarding like the Black Lives Matter movement, and someone that is a lot more advanced in their social justice and advocacy career and experience said we want to make sure that we're not centering ourselves in this narrative, because we as a panel and as a group are not Black and can only try to understand so much, but we don't have that direct experience. And so for other people on the panel, I was like, wait, my definition of centering means something different. Like, for example, in yoga, centering is to ground oneself, and centering is a good thing. And so when it comes to understanding certain problems, I think it's important to like define like certain keywords and jargons and terms to make sure that everyone is saying like, yes, this is what we're coming into the meeting with, a clear understanding, so that we're on the same page and we're not like attacking each other at the throat based on like different experiences and perspectives.
Right, absolutely. So it wasn't so much the content there, but that idea, that concept of centering yourself, that jargon was being interpreted differently. And so maybe defining those kind of words up front would have made that a little easier. Great.
One other thing I would add to that one, I think, especially in work contexts, we all want to appear smart and feel like, oh yeah, I get this. So like we let the unsaid questions can remain unsaid. And I always so much admire the bravery of people who ask just the most basic, simplest questions. I'm like, oh my God, thank you so much for asking that. I'm just like, why are we here? Why are we doing this? What is this for? What is that value? Like, the people who are brave enough to ask those questions, I think it's always just like so valuable. I think we have a bias at the time of like, ooh, if I ask that, people are gonna like think negative, but I don't know. I always think super positively of people who ask those kinds of questions.
Absolutely. That makes a ton of sense. Let's talk about assembling diverse teams and groups. And Michael, I would love to hear from you because we haven't heard from you in a minute, if you have any thoughts on that one.
I guess it depends on like how we're thinking about teams, like whether it's something that's more permanent or fluid. So like
Great.
if there's like a team within a department, like that's a different conversation than like assembling a team for a very specific problem that arises. So like when I think of like assembling teams, like I don't think about like, oh, like we need like 5 people to like run this for like a year. Like when I think of like assembling teams, it's more of a like, okay, like maybe like to get out of like this group think concept where we've already like set up some of those norms within our like the people that we're associating with in a particular problem in the workplace, inviting others to come in and like give their own feedback and thoughts. That way, like any decisions that are made about these problems, like it's not just like the same people who are like tackling, like there is diverse thought going behind it.
Great. So I'm hearing inviting kind of outside collaborators, so people that are maybe not from that usual department that you would normally form the team from, or maybe not even part of the company, right? Depending on what level of project or sort of what kind of team it is, right? But making sure that you're getting some kind of outside perspective in there to provide input, feedback, etc. Yeah, great. And I do think that, yeah, I mean, this is a great example of, you know, we didn't really define what do we mean by a team here, right? Because it could be all kinds of teams. The collective intelligence research looked at all kinds of groups, you know, working on lots of different types of tasks. So what does that kind of diversity look like, you know, in your context, you know, for a project, for a team that you run, right, on an ongoing basis? It could be for anything.
And I was actually curious to just take one more minute on that. So like Michael, for example, I know when you created like the South Texas Ideas Festival, right? Like part of that meant assembling a team. How did you go about doing that with these concepts in mind, I guess?
I think like part of the rationale, like when we were doing team building, was like, how are we incorporating like ideas that aren't, so like a lot of the, like we tried to be as like thoughtful about like how many different levels of participation there could be in a festival like that. And like given those levels of participation, like who are the people who are like planning those types of like engagement opportunities, right? So like if you have a team of like very like people from like a university and like they're the ones calling all the shots, well then like I'm pretty sure the audience is not the same people. Like you're gonna have a diverse audience, so you need to have a diverse team like tackling that.
Great. So what I'm hearing is get a certain amount of kind of reflection of the diversity of the audience. So understanding that audience, thinking about who those people are and the different types of people who you might be reaching, and then trying to reflect those demographics, those backgrounds, those perspectives, right, into the actual teams that are planning those events. Is that a fair representation? I love that.
Yeah, I just want to kind of emphasize on that. I think that's great to really take into consideration, because I know in community building, a lot of times people, especially in like community building, nonprofit, and social justice, a lot of times people that are solving the problems are not, they are not the ones, nor do they look like the ones, nor do they even have the shared experience of the ones that's experiencing the problem. So inviting those that are directly experiencing the problems allows for a different perspective rather than following the typical savior mentality. Another one, like once you invite outside people, it's also like diversity is a proactive choice. It's a very conscious decision of saying like, okay, we had this meeting. While you're in there, take a look around and seeing who's not here that could provide a different perspective. And it may be a perspective not everyone agrees on, but that's the point. It allows you to sharpen your ideas. It allows you to challenge what the norm and cultural belief and all that stuff is, and allows you to look at the angle of a problem very differently.
Great. I think that's a perfect stopping point, and there's obviously so much more that we can do for all of these, right? But this is a great start. I'll share this out with everybody after our little event today. And also, I would love to be able to continue this conversation, in Slack. So any other ideas that you might want to add, right, or share from your experience, things that you've seen other people do really well, right? I know that I've seen a lot of teachers, for example, who are great at that getting equal participation thing, and it's something that I tended to struggle with, especially with really large groups of collaborators. And so there's some great things that we can learn from, all of the different kinds of influences in our lives. So I would love to hear more about that. And there's also some other questions that you might think about answering, right, or speaking to. So what questions you might have about collective intelligence that we could maybe shine some more light on, right? An example of collective intelligence that you've already seen in any of your own organizations or groups, right? That kind of collective intelligence in action that we can all learn from. Any opportunities like right now that you see in your organizations and in your teams to leverage that kind of collective intelligence, right? So there's a million other questions you could answer, but I thought this is a good starting place. Please join us in Slack and continue to share your ideas there. And last but not least, thank you all for coming. I hope you enjoyed the event today.
Thank you, Kris.
Thank you so much. Hand clap, everyone.
Thank you.